A very warm good morning to all my dear students. As we have completed our chapter number 11, now we are moving on to our new chapter, that is chapter number 12. The name of the chapter is friction. Let's start our topic today. So, starting with friction, let us start our topic. You have learned about the force of friction in the previous chapter. We have already discussed that this force of friction is acting in the opposite direction. So, we will take an example of a bowling roll along the ground which gradually slows down and finally it comes to rest. This instance is due to the presence of force of friction. Now the question arises, where does it lies? This force of friction lies between the surface of the ball and the surface of the ground. So this is the friction. This is acting between the surface of the ball and the surface of the ground, and it opposes the motion of the ball which brings the moving ball to rest. Now similarly, another example we will take of bicycle. Similarly, when we stop pedaling a bicycle, it gradually slows down and it finally comes to rest. And can you tell me now where the force of friction is acting? Force of friction is acting between the surface of the wheels of the bicycle and the surface of the ground. This opposes the motion of the bicycle and brings this bicycle to rest. Now we are discussing the definition of friction. The force acting along the two surfaces in contact which opposes the motion of one object over the other is called force of friction. This is the definition of friction. Now we are moving on to the next topic, that is causes of friction. Now the question arises, what is the reason of this friction? Why it exists? When we try to move one sandpaper over the other, the movement is not smooth. There is friction due to interlocking of rough surfaces. See bete, when the surfaces are rough, they interlock in between them like fingers. When we cross our two hand fingers, then it is interlocked. It is very difficult to overcome. So in fact, every solid object has a rough surface. Nothing is ideally smooth on this earth. Every smooth surface even is having some roughness. The degree of roughness varies from surface to surface. Roughness is there definitely, but it may vary from surfaces to surfaces. Some surfaces are more rough, and while some surfaces are smooth. So in the case of surfaces which appears to be smooth, appears होता है जो हमें सिर्फ लग रहे हैं smooth, actually they are not smooth. The roughness of the surface can be seen only with the help of a microscope. So the roughness of the surface can be seen through a microscope in the forms of tiny hills and valleys. Hills होता है पहाड़ियों की तरह और valleys होता है खाई की तरह. I will show you this diagram. See, this is the surface showing hill and valleys. The surfaces where the surface is coming out, this part is hill and this is valley. So this is, we can find out, we can see, we can observe the rough surfaces in the form of hills and valleys. When an object is pulled over another object, these tiny hills and valleys present on the surface in contact get entangled. Entangled होता है एक दूसरे में फंस जाना. So it give rise to the friction. So what give rise to the friction? What is the cause of friction? It is the interlocking of the two surfaces that opposes the motion of one object over the another, give rise to the frictional force. This is the two surfaces. When we try to slide over the one surface to the another surface, the two surfaces tends to interlock, एक दूसरे में फंस जाते हैं, and due to the presence of tiny hills and valleys and on them and opposes the motion. So this is the reason, this is the cause, the presence of roughness in the objects or on the surfaces is the major cause of friction. So this is about the friction. So next topic is spring balance. Now can you tell me what is a spring balance? It is a device which is used to measure the force acting on an object. इस इंस्ट्रूमेंट की हेल्प से जिस भी ऑब्जेक्ट के ऊपर कितना फोर्स लग रहा है, वी आर एबल टू फाइंड दैट. What does it consist of? It consists of a spring enclosed in a metal case, and the spring balance works on the principle of stretching of spring when force is applied. The extent by which the spring gets stretched, जितना भी मुझे किसी भी वेट को फाइंड आउट करना है कि इसके ऊपर कितना फोर्स लग रहा है, तो आई हैव टू हैंग दैट वेट ऑन द हुक. सी हेयर, this is hook and this is weight. I want to find that how much force is acting on this weight, so I need to hang it on a hook. The extent by which the spring gets stretched is a measure of applied force. जितना ये spring नीचे की तरफ stretch होगा, ऊपर उतनी ही रीडिंग हमें नज़र आएगी, and this stretching of spring is indicated by the pointer, and reading is corresponding to the pointer, and the scale gives the magnitude of the force. Now we are coming on to the next topic, that is types of friction. Basically today we will discuss about three types of friction: static friction, limiting friction, and kinetic friction. Before moving to the static friction, I will tell you the basic meaning of all these three words. Static means stationary, which is at rest. So ये वो friction है जो उन objects पे लगेगा that are not actually in motion, they are static, stationary. Next is limiting friction, and after that we have kinetic. Kinetic means फ्रिक्शन दैट इज एक्टिंग ऑन अ मूविंग ऑब्जेक्ट. जब एक ऑब्जेक्ट मूव कर रहा है तो उसके ऊपर कौन सा फ्रिक्शन लग रहा है, दैट इज काइनेटिक फ्रिक्शन. एंड फर्दर काइनेटिक फ्रिक्शन इज डिवाइडेड इनटू टू टाइप्स, दैट इज स्लाइडिंग फ्रिक्शन एंड रोलिंग फ्रिक्शन. लेट अस स्टार्ट विद स्टैटिक फ्रिक्शन फर्स्ट. The opposing force, always friction is the opposing force. It comes into play when one object tends to move over the surface of the another, but the actual motion has not started, is called static friction. See बेटा, this friction, अगर मुझे किसी ऑब्जेक्ट को मूव करना है तो जब तक वो ऑब्जेक्ट मूव नहीं कर रहा है, एट दैट टाइम जब तक वो स्टेशनरी है, उसके ऊपर स्टैटिक फ्रिक्शन जो है वो अप्लाई हो रहा है. It prevents the motion and does not allow two objects to slide upon one another. Very interesting example I will take up. Suppose I need to pull a box. If I have starting pulling the box, it is not moving, but after 10 seconds तक I have tried a lot, but in the next second it started moving. Till 10 seconds at that time I was applying the force, but the box is not moving because of static friction. Okay, now next is limiting friction. If you move a heavy box from one place to another, the force required to overcome friction at that instant the box starts moving from rest is the measure of limiting friction. What is limiting friction bete? For that 10 seconds तो I have pulled the box, but for 11 seconds it has started moving. So जो 10 seconds पे था, it is at the verge of motion, बिल्कुल move करने ही वाला था. At that time the friction is known as the limiting friction. The maximum value of static friction is called the limiting friction, because after this the box start moving, the object start moving, and limiting friction is at the verge of motion. जब वो object बिल्कुल move करने के लिए ready है at that time. So hence limiting friction is the maximum opposing force that comes into play when one object is just at the verge of moving over the surface of another object. Now moving on to kinetic friction. Kinetic means moving. When we increase the applied force slightly beyond the limiting friction, we see that the box begins to slide over. This doesn't mean that friction has disappeared. बॉक्स ने मूव करना स्टार्ट कर दिया, बट इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि वहाँ से सारे फ्रिक्शन रिमूव हो गए. नो, नाउ द काइनेटिक फ्रिक्शन इज इन द फॉर्म, एंड काइनेटिक फ्रिक्शन इज द opposing force that comes into play when one object is actually moving over the surface of the other object. जब एक ऑब्जेक्ट दूसरे ऑब्जेक्ट के ऊपर स्लाइड करना स्टार्ट कर देता है, then this friction comes into field. There are two types of kinetic friction. One is sliding, one is rolling. There is difference between sliding friction. The sliding friction appears when one object slides over the other object. ठीक है? And for example, when a log of wood is moved on the flat surface, it slides. किसी चीज़ को घसीटना है मुझे, it is sliding friction. जब जो friction slide हो रहा है. I'll show you the example. See बेटा देखो, in the figure A, this person is this, इसको खींच रहा है. ये कौन सा है? स्लाइडिंग. ये कौन सा फ्रिक्शन है? स्लाइडिंग. मुझे किसी चीज़ को रोल करना है, ये कौन सा फ्रिक्शन शो कर रहा है? रोलिंग फ्रिक्शन. ओके, सो व्हाट इज रोलिंग फ्रिक्शन? द अपोजिंग फोर्स दैट कम्स इनटू प्ले व्हेन वन ऑब्जेक्ट इज एक्चुअली रोलिंग ओवर द अदर सरफेस ऑफ अनदर ऑब्जेक्ट इज कॉल्ड रोलिंग. नाउ लेट्स डिस्कस एक्टिविटी 1. What this activity is about? This activity is showing that rolling friction is less than sliding friction in magnitude. I told you in the previous lesson also that magnitude means numerical value. So how we can prove that rolling friction is less than? देखिए बेटा, किसी चीज़ के नीचे रोलर्स लगे हैं, वो रोलिंग है, उसको मूव करना बहुत आसान होता है. लेकिन एक हैवी ऑब्जेक्ट जिसके नीचे रोलर्स या व्हील्स नहीं लगे, उसको मूव करना इज़ क्वाइट डिफ़िकल्ट. सो दिस सिंपली शोज दैट स्लाइडिंग फ्रिक्शन इज़ मोर देन रोलिंग फ्रिक्शन. और यही हम इस एक्टिविटी में डिस्कस भी करेंगे. वी हैव टू टेक अ वुडन ब्लॉक, वी हैव टू टेक अ स्प्रिंग बैलेंस, and we have to take a wooden table and 3-4 pencils. Now what we have to do, we have to place a rectangular wooden block on a smooth tabletop. Attach a spring balance to its hook and gently pull the spring balance in the horizontal direction. Now you have to note down the reading of the spring balance. Now you have to repeat the same by placing 3-4 pencils parallel to each other under the wooden block. अब आपको उस wooden block के नीचे pencils रखनी है. Now you have to take the reading from the spring balance. Now what we will observe? See, we have observed that the force required to pull the wooden block in B is less than A. In the first case, we have simply attached the spring balance, put it on the wooden block. Now we have to stretch the box or pull the box which is kept above the pencils. So you can take it as a rollers. These are acting as a roller. So rolling friction is less than the sliding friction. Now, whenever possible, sliding friction is replaced by rolling friction. How we can achieve? We can achieve this by using wheels, ball bearings, roller bearings, etc. Children love to play roller skates to feel the adventurous fast motion. Now, roller skates have tiny wheels. These wheels have small rolling friction and helps in fast motion for the skaters. These days, suitcases and bags are provided with tiny wheels. Even a child can pull it. So these wheels, very small rolling friction. This is the reason it is convenient to pull suitcase with rollers. Now we will discuss the last topic, that is factors affecting friction. The nature of surface in contact with each other. The rough surfaces have more friction, smooth surfaces have less friction, and the second one is weight of the object. If the weight, more is weight, more friction, less weight, less friction. So these are the factors on which the friction depends. In the next class we will discuss about the fluid friction.